You're listening to Business is Boring, a podcast that reckons it's anything but. Business is Boring is brought to you by SparkLab, offering inspiration and practical advice to help businesses find their edge. To hear more about SparkLab, including details about the latest events, workshops, and business tools, visit sparklab.co.nz. And now, here's your host, Simon Pound.
Kia ora koutou katoa. Welcome to Business is Boring. Boards and governance have a well-known diversity problem. With large companies, it's obvious to see. But when you get down to the boards of growth companies and startups, where perhaps gender disparity is even more prevalent in the industries, the problems with boards are only compounded. With startups, as the old metaphor goes, you're putting the tracks down as you're driving the locomotive. And startup boards are also often learning as they go, with many newcomers to governance. One group out to help this situation is OnBoard. They support boards to create more diversity, more pathways onto governance, and to help professionalise startup and scale-up boards through education, mentorship, and advocacy. Founder and director Cassie McAdams and program director Sophie McLernon both work with venture and growth companies. Cassie is investment and community manager at Movac, one of New Zealand's largest and most established venture capital operators, and Sophie is the growth director at Snowball Effect, one of the largest and most professional sources of private investment capital for businesses. They join me now to talk their journeys to being part of the ecosystem, the work they do with OnBoard, and a new piece of research that's helped to put data around the challenges and opportunities facing startup boards. Tēnā kōrua, thank you for being here.
Morning, Simon. Thanks for having us.
Kia ora, Simon. Nice to put a face to the name. The man behind the podcast.
The Simon Pound.
It's so nice to have you both in here. So we're going to be talking about OnBoard a little bit more in detail later. But just before we kind of hear how you put it together, tell us what it is, because it's such a cool initiative. And it's not just a simple kind of one thing, is it? So kind of give us the elevator pitch for what OnBoard does.
Yeah, sure. So we are on a mission to build a pipeline of different startup directors. And we do this by fielding applications from individuals every year who want to begin their governance journey. And we pair them with startup boards who host them for an observer role for a year. And then in the background, as a program, we deliver a suite of half-day workshops and micro-learning sessions throughout the year. So they get the practical experience with the board and the learning experience in the classroom.
Tell us a little bit about your current roles, as they're really interesting kind of like key meeting points with heaps of people in the startup growth ecosystem, working in two different edges of investment capital. Maybe starting with you, Cassie.
Yeah, sure. So my day job, I think that's the main thing to note first, is OnBoard is our passion project. It's an initiative that we run in our spare time, a couple of hours during the week in the evenings, and typically a Saturday or Sunday morning.
Clearly we hate free time.
Yeah.
Very much like each other's time.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. And so, my day job is working at Movac, as you noted in your very good intro. It's a large venture capital firm here in New Zealand. And my role there is kind of, I guess, similar to what others do in investment teams at other venture capital funds, in that we're out meeting founders, meeting companies to assess whether they are suitable for venture capital, and then analysing them, proposing the deal. And then once we've decided to invest, we often join the board, which is why there's a great intersection of the OnBoard program and my role at Movac.
Yeah, awesome. And your work, Sophie, is a kind of different approach to venture capital, in that you're getting capital for ventures, but it's not venture capital.
Yeah, exactly. So I work for Snowball Effect, and I'm a director of growth capital there. Snowball Effect is an investment platform that helps businesses raise capital. But as Cassie was kind of talking to earlier, her venture stage happens to be a little bit earlier. We're more at that growth capital stage. So we're kind of working with businesses that are a little bit more established. They've kind of got product market fit. They're looking to raise maybe $2 to $10 million, which is going to accelerate their growth strategy.
And they might be kind of different shaped businesses. Hey, like there's lots of different kinds of businesses that can come through Snowball Effect, right?
Yeah. We're probably less looking for the moonshot company, and actually those businesses that have got that traction, they're going to succeed. Snowball Effect was started as a crowdfunding platform. So typically we do see quite a lot of consumer businesses, but now we're starting to, as we've kind of grown, and I suppose speaking to that point is that we're more creating bespoke capital strategies for businesses, and we're a lot more agnostic in the type of businesses that we raise for. But kind of talking to Cassie's point earlier, and I suppose this is where that governance piece comes in as well, is what we do see is that companies that have got strong governance tend to do better in raising capital and tend to often get better terms with it as well.
Yeah, like just to kind of round that point out as well, because I think Snowball Effect is something that maybe lots of people might have interacted with when they've popped onto the offer page for Parrot Dog, or, seen something that's like, like you say, a consumer brand that, is very recognizable. And that's a very, visible side of the business. But then there is that other bit, isn't there, which is like kind of a huge network of just investors who want to like do kind of, like how much of your stuff is those kind of public offers, and how much of it is the private investment kind of piece?
Oh man, it's probably 50% public, 50% private now. And as I kind of spoke to before, we're that investment platform. So we've probably got the largest database of investors, but we've got a really broad network of investors that we work with as well. So whether it's the retail investor, high net worth, family office, venture firms like Cassie, through to the PE as well. But yeah, it's amazing. We right now I'm working with 3 very different offers. One is for a sparkling water, one is for a super interesting maritime intelligence platform, and the other one is a recruitment platform in the legal space. So I think kind of what excites both of us is these companies, which are just kind of, you're working with a bunch of businesses doing really interesting things, and then on the other side with the investors as well, working with really interesting people there.
And with those things, like, like the sparkling water, for example, they might be looking to take their success in New Zealand and redo it in Australia and raise a commensurate amount of money for it. But with your work, Cassie, you've got people who are kind of, here's something that's never existed, but we think it could kind of change the world. So quite a different change. How do you get into that world of venture investment?
Yeah, I think so. I started my career, I did law and science in Dunedin, didn't really know what I wanted to do, and that continued for quite some time. I sort of just went with the flow, more or less. Started out on a mainstream track like many people do, went into PwC. Like being an entrepreneur or sliding straight into startups just wasn't a thing for when I finished uni. I think it's like a really clear option and a great option for many people now, which is amazing. And that took me over to London, consulting at PwC, and I was working in Deutsche Bank at the time over there, and the bank was going through some pretty rough stuff. Like they were getting a big slap on the wrist for some unethical behaviour. The business was making huge redundancies, and the guts of the culture just got totally ripped out of the place, and it was only a big corporate culture to start with, right? So, and at the same time, I was sitting at my desk reading about this term called the unicorn that had popped up, and I just was fascinated by it. I started, subscribing to all of these tech newsletters, and sort of, just thought, I don't know what I want to be doing, but this corporate style of work is just not for me. And so my now husband at the time, we decided to take a year out and do an MBA program, and pretty much just got a list of the top 10 programs in the world up. We're like, okay, bunch of cold places in the US, somewhere on the outskirts of Paris, more of the UK, Madrid. And so that's where we decided to go. And so there was a lot of learning, a lot of navel gazing, a lot of red wine, a lot of tapas. Had a fantastic year and a half there. And pretty early on in the piece, I've learned more about this venture ecosystem, the startup ecosystem, and just doubled down on everything in that space that I could. And everyone said to me, no, you can't get into venture capital. You need to have a finance background. And I did hear that, but I didn't really listen. I didn't really care. I was just there to have an exploratory year. I did some extra courses and worked at Fundy Ventures, which was a student deal analysis setup. So kind of like cut my teeth on some of that work. And at the conclusion of the program, went back to London, and I just had a really brutal, it might have been even up to 6 months actually, and it was really depressing, and what everyone had been telling me was true. Winter. They were right. I was trying to get into a space like venture in London where everyone on paper had huge experience already in that sector, and so I thought, okay, plan B, to get in here, I have to network my way in because I'm just not going to stack up. And just got like cold shoulders and closed doors. It was absolutely brutal. Nobody really cared. And good old mum, on reflection, classic playbook from a mum on this side of the world that wants their kid to move on home. She said, just come home for a couple of weeks. Press reset, rethink what's happening here, and you'll go back so much better for it. Followed mum's instructions, came back to New Zealand, and once I was here, she said, just pop on down to Auckland. You might meet some people, you might hear about some interesting stuff that's going on. And so I did, and I found the exact opposite to what I did in London. I was reaching out to people with really one-sided requests, like, oh, hey, I'm here. Could you meet with me and have a coffee? I'd love to hear about you and what you're doing and what's happening here. And it was this really nice feeling. And even like Lance Wiggs, who manages Punakaiki Ventures, went to his office, made me a homemade coffee, and got the whiteboard out, sketched out the ecosystem.
He loves a whiteboard.
I know. He was like, here's some ways that you could think about breaking in here. It was just, and I just thought, what am I doing wanting to go back to London when it's going to be short term? The people there don't really care. I've got no connection to people building businesses there. And decided to move home. Not after deciding to go back to Europe to really send it for one last summer. Had a great old time there. And when I came back to New Zealand, I took a role at NZTE in the investment team. And that is a really wonderful, wonderful organisation, taking Kiwi businesses to the world. A lot of people returning to New Zealand really identify with that. And it was perfect for me because in the back of my head, I was still really interested in venture investment as a career option. And so I was able to learn about all the hottest startups in town, build those connections, and with investors as well. Like, it's a really critical part of our role. And at the same time, I started thinking about like longer term career stuff here in New Zealand where I know I want to be long term. And I think like many people in the business world, they think I want to be on a board at some point in my career. How do I start that, or how do I begin, getting ready for that? Not necessarily jumping into it straight away, but it's on their radar as something they're interested in. And of course, being in venture capital, being a high impact, positive impact director is critical as well. As I mentioned before, we often take a board seat, so it's a large portion of our time. And I think people think of venture as, this like sexy source of capital, but actually once we invest, that's when the real work begins. That's when the effort goes in the board and supporting the company through what a lot of the time is really tough times because they're doing improbable things, really challenging things. And so being there in a governance seat is a big way that we contribute.
And a super responsibility, right? Like for helping make something unlikely happen. You're one of the guiding voices. Yeah,
totally. And then while I was at NZTE, I was supported into a secondment at Movac so that I could take some learnings back to NZTE, and that's how I transitioned over to Movac eventually. Joined them for a while, loved it, absolutely loved it, and found a really good fit.
What was your interest in governance, Sophie? Like, what got you into wanting to be part of the OnBoard program?
Probably I even need to take a step back, actually, because my career was actually really varied as well. And like Cassie, what I started out doing, which was a science degree in Dunedin, and spent most of my career in wine sales in sort of New Zealand, Australia, Singapore, is very different to what I did now. And actually, before coming on here, I was kind of reflecting and I was like, okay, well, hospitality to startups, quite different. But what are the kind of similar themes that are coming through there? And what I kind of recognized was the things that attract me to the hospitality and to the wine industry and therefore to the startup space is kind of this curiosity, this connection and people and passion, and you've got that in spades in both of those. So I was working in Singapore. And Singapore was probably quite a pivotal part to my career of kind of being like, I think I want to make a move. I think I know where I want to go, but I'm not totally sure on how I need to get there. And so, people in Singapore is this really amazing type of person that they're all super driven. They all want to make things happen. Singapore's a really easy place to do business, sort of on par with New Zealand in terms of starting a business and things like that. And very fortuitously, a friend of a friend happened to be in Singapore for the Formula One, and he had an Nespresso-compatible coffee company. And he was like, oh, I'd love to start this here. And so I got introduced, we started chatting, and, next thing you knew, we'd all started a business together. Not without, from my brother, some clear instruction on a strong shareholders agreement and a constitution, which luckily we never needed to use. But I suppose that was that second point of being like, I love being able to build something. There's something super special about, really working with people that you admire and you respect and are on the same page as you. And then the third thing while I was there was I was working with New Zealand Trade and Enterprise, which Cassie mentioned before. And it really is a wonderful organisation. Like for New Zealand businesses who are exporting, working with them and working with them in the right way, there's, so much value you can get out of them. And so while I was working with them, I was sort of thinking, okay, this feels like this could be the pathway to where I want to get. So we were working with New Zealand Trade and Enterprise. You are offshore, you're seeing New Zealand businesses in a global stage, right? And you're sort of thinking, we're so well respected offshore. There's this real secret sauce to Kiwis, and even though we're from this small country in the South Pacific, we're doing a really, really good job. So I moved back to New Zealand in 2019, and I was working in Wynyard Quarter there in the generator, and kind of fortuitously things started to happen again. And I happened to meet two guys, Danny and Owen, from what is now New Zealand Growth Capital Partners. And I was talking to them and I sort of was saying, hey, what do you do? And, to that point of kind of this network of people and connections and stuff. And Danny said to me, oh, this is what we do, why don't you talk to this person? Why don't you get introduced to this person? And I was like, this is really the space that I want to be in, Like I really love the passion that people have got. At that time, Danny had a fake flower business that he was doing, and he's gone now on to start Basis. So anyway, I went to New Zealand Trade and Enterprise. That was incredible. As Cassie said, such a good way to kind of see the ecosystem of New Zealand. My thought was that I would try and move into the tech team or to the investment team. But a role came up with Snowball Effect, and I've been there a year now and just absolutely love it. And yeah, it's probably, I'll talk to it later on about kind of how I ended up meeting Cassie and getting onto OnBoard with her as well.
Yeah, awesome.
Well, it's still the show too long.
Yeah, and it's such a cool space to be in, that kind of space of stitching to connecting people to the right people and stitching together like a right kind of like crew of people to help make something happen, and being able to see the best in things, but also maybe the concerns that could be in front of them. And it's such an interesting world being in that capital that capital area. And in terms of that, the journey to OnBoard, Cassie, what was the thing that got you to set up OnBoard, and what did you set out to do with it?
I think at its heart, it kind of came from this selfish motivation to begin with, in that I was back in New Zealand and I was really interested in governance for, building my career in general, and searching around and couldn't find anything in the startup space at all. And talked to a bunch of my peers, and equally they had the same desire. And so I thought, okay, well, from a learner or the observer perspective, there's an absolute gap here. And then I had a couple of quite good insights from my work at NZT as well, because in the investment team you work with mountains of companies a year, like 50 companies a year you have touch points with, let alone like the wider team. And so I could see what was happening on the boards of those companies, and I thought there's a couple of issues here. One is capacity. So we're on the start here locally of real acceleration. A lot more companies are getting produced every year. There's better quality companies, better quality people, more capital, and there's just the same pool of directors. And so we just need more directors, full stop. And also we need them to be a little bit different to what they are today, so that we can build this idea of diversity of thought into our decision making. And then the second part was that the world over, and it was happening in New Zealand as well, and still is today, is that there is a connection issue. And what happens is when a board appoints new directors, the existing directors ask around their networks. It's only natural, right? We all do it in our own networks, and our own networks are pretty similar to us, and that is one of the reasons why the boards out there are pretty homogenous in terms of like demographic. And so it was get more people that are a bit different and also find a way to connect them in and get them in the orbit of directors today. So that was what I was piecing together when I started to like design what this could possibly look like.
You know, and the observation around boards would be, it used to be people would go, well, we need someone who knows finance.
Yeah.
We need someone who knows some law maybe.
Yeah.
And someone who's been involved in company operations. And, you know, maybe those are 3 areas that were especially in kind of areas around engineering and technology, male dominated. And so you ended up with 3 dudes called Kevin or something. And that was thought to be a good board.
Yeah. And there is a place for Kev.
Yeah.
You know, there is a place for Kev, but we want that sort of like different and diverse people as well.
And we laugh about it in a kind of a lighthearted way. And just to be clear, never ever want to criticise those amazing people
Kevins,
with Kevins with so much experience, you know, because they've worked so hard to get there and they bring a huge amount. And actually, those Kevins have been our biggest supporters. They've got open minds and have welcomed the program. So don't want to just don't.
Yeah, but like it is so important to. You know, have, as you say, diversity of thought in these spaces.
Yeah.
What kind of things have you put together, or how did you go about getting OnBoard off the ground from that first idea?
So I was coming at it from the learner perspective, and I, at the time, had zero governance experience, which is quite wild when I was building a governance program. And I'm still on that journey. I'm still early in my career in that perspective. So I did a lot of consultation with a lot of investor directors out there and a lot of independent directors. Some like rattled me quite a lot, said that this would never fly. Like, why would people want learners in the room? And that just fired me up even more. So
you don't want to say you can't do something to Cassie.
and then had a bunch of really supportive investor directors that helped me craft because it has to be a win-win. So that's the critical part of the program. So it's learning for an observer, and maybe just to say what an observer actually is. They're an additional member to the board. They are there to sit in and listen, and the board might invite them to contribute in places, like they can share their views, but the board shouldn't rely on anything that they're saying, and there's, you know, it should be minuted correctly and all the rest of it. So for a board to have an observer in the room, they want somebody that's highly relevant. They want somebody that can bring something that the other directors don't have. So that's the win for the board. And then the win for the individual who's getting paired with the host board is on this big development journey. So they're doing the classroom part of the OnBoard program, and they're doing the observership role for a year. So it was really putting all of that together and making sure that I did a lot of sharing out and about in the market to make sure that this was going to work for everyone.
Awesome, and we'll be back in a moment with Sophie and Cassie to hear how they've built OnBoard and their latest piece of research. And we're back with Cassie McAdams and Sophie McLernon from OnBoard. So how did you kind of get started?
I did think carefully about whether I should actually share this. I don't think I've told anyone this in the past, but as noted, I did a lot of consultation with investors, and one of those was Blackbird, the wonderful group of people based here in New Zealand now, and they were doing their first ever Sunrise conference here, and they said, OnBoard totally aligns with this. Why don't you come along and we'll give you a 10-minute slot? And I thought, holy moly, okay, right, 300 people in the audience, just the audience I want, bunch of operators, investor directors, you know, this is perfect. But I actually didn't have anything. All I had was all these conversations and in my head this design of the program, but just didn't want to miss up the opportunity. So just jumped on up there and talked about the program that was happening. We've got 10 hosts for a pilot year. Applications are opening in a couple of weeks. Just pretty much sold smoke and mirrors to this like enormous conference centre of people. And after that, I had to do it. It would have been suicide if it had fallen over. So yeah, that really kicked me into action. Yeah, the big secret. It's out. Secret's out.
You obviously had enough of it kind of coming together. You were able to then pull it all. But there must be so many people who stand up at things and go, we're about to do this. And then you're like, gosh, I guess we'd better do it now.
Probably every
Cassie's
second founder we speak
ethic
to.
And her ability to pump things out just like blows my mind. As a quick aside on that one.
How did you get involved, Sophie?
Yeah. So when I was working in the Wynyard Quarter at the Generator, speaking to those two people from NZGCP, one of the guys introduced me to Cassie, and it was actually when Cassie was running her first cohort, the one that, she just said she was looking for people for. So I applied for it and I got shortlisted, and I was like, this is an incredible program, So OnBoard is it's a tech program. However, we often have a couple of wildcards each year. And so for that year, they had a bra company, which was great. And so I met with the chair at the time. She was like, I'd love to take on 2 observers, yourself and someone else. Let me go back to the board and see if we can do that. Would you believe it? I didn't get the role because they wanted diversity on the board, a board full of females. They needed a male. And then to the other point of that as well is actually the other thing that boards are thinking about when taking on an observer is what skill set do they need, right? Like what's that skill matrix that they're looking at? And my background was kind of offshore, go-to-market, building new markets. And the guy that they took on, his background was direct-to-consumer here in New Zealand. And the board had decided that their strategy was to really double down on direct-to-consumer. So I'd gone through this and I'd sort of gone, this is an amazing program. I totally want to be involved. And to that point earlier of, there are some people you just meet in your life and you're like, I really rate and respect that person and I want to work with them. In the back of your mind, something starts kind of percolating. You're like, some way, somehow, I'm going to find a way to track her down and
And I thought, what is up with this chick? She's like,
she just won't go away.
No.
And then the second one was when I was at NZTA and, one of the lockdowns, one of the 3 or 4 lockdowns had happened and had some spare time, and I was kind of looking at what was it that was holding back consumer and FMCG companies in New Zealand, and one of them was governance. And so I went to Cassie again, hey, it's me again, can we white label your product and can we kind of move across verticals? So we'll have a tech sector, we'll have a consumer sector, and we kind of, Cassie was up for it, and we started sort of, again, having consultations with companies and with people who were, could have been really great supporters of that. And where we actually landed in the end was actually, let's stick to our knitting, let's stay firmly in the tech sector and let's just try and build on what we're doing and kind of elevate that. And I think we're really well on our way to doing so.
So what does the offering look like today?
Yeah, cool. So OnBoard as an organisation is working towards building a pipeline of diverse and different directors in the tech sector. So we have our Lighthouse initiative, and that's that 1-year program that Cassie spoke to earlier. It's got an observership on a leading tech board, and then it's got this kind of supporting program below it, which is 4 quarterly workshops on governance fundamentals over the year. There's self-directed learning, and then there is also these sort of lunch and learn sessions that we have over the year, of which it's kind of things that are keeping directors up at night.
And in the tech industry where you're focused, you've recently done a bit of research, around kind of the actual issues, which you must have known and, had a feeling that these were the issues, right? But the fact that it's an industry that's still growing, it's only a couple of generations in, the people who are involved, it might be their first time being directors, it means this is even more needed, right? But also, there's even less knowledge to draw from, less experience. Like it's this a cute little catch-22, right?
It is. And what came across loud and clear in the report was first-time founders and CEOs they're learning on the fly, and they're very, very busy people, and governance can be a big time suck if you're just thinking about some of the core things that have to happen, like preparing a board pack. And so even that basic stuff is just extra effort to learn about, and there's not a lot of ways that they can get that done really effectively and efficiently. And we sort of, as a duo, realised that there's just not a lot of as you say, information out there for private companies. Sorry, obviously they're private versus listed companies that are ring-fenced on a specific exchange, and they have to share a lot of information for regulatory reasons. So that's why we see all the diversity figures on listed company boards. And I think at best we get information in the private sector and a subset of the private sector growth companies, scaling, quickly growing companies, for the split of capital deployed between males and females for gender. And so we thought, actually, there's so many more insights that we could grab at a board level that might be useful to people out there. And I think we're in a good position to do that because we've worked so hard to gain everyone's trust. We've worked with them over 4 years now. And so our first effort into creating some insights was this survey that we set out. It must have been a couple of months ago now. Ecosystem-wide, we had a really good mix of people responding, all different director seat types, lots of females and males, and just got some really good insights on what people's experiences are out there on the board, what's happening that's really good and what's happening that's not so good. And so we're in the process of pulling together a report on that, probably release it in the next month or so, to share what everyone's seeing and give some people, share ideas on what could be done differently.
And when you talk about this kind of diversity of thought that's required, it doesn't just mean getting another woman who's an accountant on when you've got 3 accountants, right? Like,
that's exactly
tell us
right.
what you mean by the diversity of thought.
Yeah, so that is what we focus on rather than diversity full stop. And this is the idea that people bring to the table the culmination of many things, not just what they look like in a photograph, not just their gender and their ethnicity, for example. So it's all of their background, skills, experiences, culture, and it means that that's the perspective that they contribute. And what will enhance a group's ability to increase its diversity of thought around the table and enhance its decision-making is on a case-by-case basis because it depends on who's in that group. And so we try and be an inclusive program because of that. It's down to what the board is seeking. We don't have a specific cutoff for gender, for example. And the interesting thing about diversity of thought is it's most impactful where there's really complex decision-making and uncertainty, which screams startups, right? That is it in a nutshell. And that's a lot of thinking that, I don't know if you've come across Lloyd Mander before. Great. Yeah, thought leader on this in New Zealand, definitely worth looking up. So that's what we work around.
Yeah, I've got this little kind of X I'm grinding at the moment around around startup boards, and that there's so many now after the first couple of generations of startups, so many people who understand hardware and software and SaaS and scaling and operations and finance and all of these things, and they're often found through boards. But there is, in my observation, a real lack of people who have brand, marketing or design experience. And a lot of these companies do have, selling things to people, building a name in the community and having, design of their products or physical or software or whatever as part of it. And it feels to me like that would be a real opportunity for a lot of startup boards that may have a male-female diversity problem as well, to bring more women onto their boards, as there are so many women leaders who have run brands, run marketing, and run design across all kinds of industries.
And maybe it's about those individuals working on their own branding to frame it up as a strategy thing that they bring to the table, because it is. It absolutely is. And maybe also it could be down to stage as well. And because, as I said, what each board needs is totally on a case-by-case basis. The existing directors are going to be looking for what their gaps are and what is coming up for the company in the relatively short term and what the challenges and opportunities are there. And potentially, it would be interesting to look into. Maybe brand and marketing strategy individuals could have a strong place on maybe an earlier stage board, because often they are quite product or technical, tech heavy, and so they wouldn't have that guidance elsewhere in the organisation, whereas maybe later stage companies would have that in their exec leadership team. There might be a head of doing that function already. So that could be one to look down the trail of.
Yeah, maybe. And like, like it's kind of, it's such an interesting space where, often boards kind of mirror a lot of the kind of key functions of a business, where you'll have someone who's like an explicit mentor on the board to people who are inside the company. Yeah. Mm-hmm. But the whole brand and marketing thing seems to have fallen out of so many startup and growth companies. But yeah, like, and if that kind of diversity of thought, there'll be heaps of people listening who, probably are really interested in governance, but may not have seen themselves as being a person who can go to governance because maybe you feel like you need to have had a big success, or maybe you feel like you need to have been part of 3 or 4 big companies or run a massive team. But that's not the case. Hey, like, there's skills that can be learnt, practices that you can get better at, and your role of not being old and wizened may in itself be a benefit, right?
Totally.
How can they get involved?
I think, it's about identifying what you really bring to the table and then finding a place, a home for those. And we know that these roles are by referrals. I think there's a lot of pressure on the board to have a diverse group of people, and that's because you want to be making good decisions, so diversity of thought is critical, and by proxy, that often means a diverse group of people. And there's pressure from the they need to perform well for the company on behalf of the shareholders, do the best they can, and so they need the right people in the room. So all of the responsibility goes there, but I think the individual can also do a lot to bring themselves into that realm of the
individual can apply for OnBoard.
Yeah, and so I think, we know that the directors are currently taking referrals for the roles. And so how can that individual get into that referral realm of a company that might need them? And I think it's just leveraging the wider network to get at the heads up that the role's going, because they're not listed anywhere typically, and then getting somebody that can potentially influence on your behalf, like toss your name into the ring, and then be really clear, I think, on pseudo-governance experience. I think a lot of people might get written off really quickly because they don't have actual core governance experience. So maybe thinking about, have you advised a management team or a CEO? Have you prepared board reports? Or do you have really great governance experience, but it's a different type of organisation, like a not-for-profit or a charity? And make sure that you can articulate that in a really compelling way and say why it's important, just so it's not a reason to get put to the bottom of the pile.
How can people get involved in OnBoard? Both if you're like a company going, boy, we could use some different perspectives, or I would like to support this mission, and if you're a person who might be interested in governance.
Yeah, well, we welcome anyone to reach out. You can catch Cassie and I both on LinkedIn or through our emails or on the website. As an individual, the applications are actually opening in September, and so we welcome anyone to apply, right, at any stage. Like we get about 150 applications every year, so it's a lot of reading, but we love reading the applications, right? We want to understand like why governance is important to you, what you've done, what your skill set is, what you can bring to the table. And to Cassie's point, like these are the things that you should be starting to think about anyway. And then we've got our host board. So the host boards come to us in a couple of ways. It can either be via our venture capital partners. So we're really deeply entrenched in the ecosystem, and we're so thankful to all of our kind of community partners because they enable us to do OnBoard. So yes, we get the host boards from there, but you can also reach out directly as well. And kind of every year we do about 20 to 25 people through each cohort. And we also take scholarships too. So if someone within your organisation that you've been championing, if you want to put them forward, that you can come and talk to us. Maybe this is a good opportunity for me to just quickly call out our sponsors because OnBoard wouldn't really be possible without them, So they've been with us. We've got our founding partners who have been with us since the beginning. So New Zealand Trade and Enterprise, NZTE, New Zealand Growth Capital Partners, NZGCP, Callaghan Innovation, and DLA Piper. And actually, because of them, we've been able to hire our first employee this year, which is amazing. We're so stoked about that. And then we have our delivery partners, so the Institute of Directors and Amanda Miller that run the workshops, and then a couple of real key individuals which have been with us since the beginning, Deborah Hall and Naomi Merrick. And they've just been like incredible soundboards. They've been there to kind of review things, talk us through them, and they just really care deeply about diversity of thought as well. So it really is like a community program, and we're so thankful to that. So yeah, it really is kind of if anyone's got any interest in any capacity, reach out, because as you can tell, Cassie and I love to chat. And so we welcome a conversation.
Yeah, love it. And what's some of the impact you've been able to deliver with that kind of crew together?
So we have had, we're in our 4th cohort, and we've had over 500 people apply. 68 people have completed the program, and from that 78% come from underrepresented groups, whether that be gender, ethnicity, sexuality, and then 71% have gone on to secure a governance role since then. So, that's a really great stat that we're just so proud of. We got a call from a woman a couple of months ago, and she was the COO at Aroa Biosurgery, so like a large listed tech company here in New Zealand. And she was interested to get into governance, startup governance, but she didn't know how, and it was kind of this chicken and the egg problem, right? Because she needed experience to get the role, and then there was sort of nothing that catered to what she actually needed in the market. And so she went through our program, and at the end of that got offered an official role as a director on another leading tech startup company. And that actually gave her the confidence to quit her job and decide that she actually wanted to go after a career full-time in governance. So, it's stories like that that are just so, Cassie and I we chatted after that. We're like, wow, it's really having an impact, And then I guess on the broader scale, if you think about it, like the tech sector in New Zealand is, people are saying that by 2029 it'll be our largest export. And for every tech role that is created in New Zealand, an additional 5 roles are created from that. So there's kind of this wider impact too, back to kind of the New Zealand economy. So it sort of starts with one person on one board, but there's that ripple effect that comes with that.
It's so cool. It's kind of bringing forward maybe, it might have been another 10 or 15 years for a lot of these people to move into that. And by speeding up our ecosystem maturity on that kind of timeline, it's an amazing thing to be able to do.
Yeah, we're pretty proud of ourselves. Yeah. And we know it's working well because directors are reaching out saying, hey, who's been through your program? This is what I'm looking for. Can you recommend anyone? And yeah, we usually can. And the program is a really deep, narrow offering. As Sophie said, we are 25 people in the cohort per year. So we're not sort of spreading ourselves thin. Our goal is to go really hard with a set of people and get that conversion into governance roles, high, acknowledging that this is a build over a career. Like, we don't expect people to go out and immediately be able to secure an independent director seat, but they are certainly securing other observer roles or building their way up to it.
What advice would you have for anyone who does spot a problem in an industry? And it's been a pretty big and intractable problem for a long time. And it's so cool to have gone in and built that coalition of companies and supporters to help you make this possible. And then come up with the course material, get the double-sided marketplace going. Yeah. It's a huge thing to do. What advice would you have to someone who does see a problem and starts to think, maybe I could start to help solve this?
Yeah, I think what served me well is just being humble. I knew heaps of it from the learner perspective, but I didn't know about governance. So I think just going to people and saying, hey, this is what I reckon. What do you think? Can you give me a shove in the right direction or otherwise, and asking for that help? And I think, you're not going to know everything. So looking to others who can support you has been critical here. And I think making sure that you're genuinely passionate about something. So for me, I'm passionate about the tech sector, and we've talked about that at length here. I'm interested in governance, but actually what I'm passionate about is people and giving people opportunities and helping them develop themselves. And I think that probably shows through pretty strongly. So I wouldn't recommend that people spot something on the periphery of their lives and give it a whirl. I think you have to be deep. You have to be deep and motivated.
Awesome. And as a final thought, what will success be for OnBoard and for you two personally?
Oh, yeah. I reckon for OnBoard, it would be so cool if we were made redundant. Yeah. People don't need a program to have these wonderful people as observers, and if directors truly care about diversity of thought in their room, they will appoint board-ready first-timers and commit to mentoring them, or they will get observers and then they'll appoint them when they're ready. So hopefully that will just be the way things work and we won't need the program. But we are like hot on the chase of many other things in relation to this space that we reckon we can add value and solve some problems or respond to an opportunity. So we are going to be a little bit of a evolving initiative.
Yeah, I think we'll kind of have that OnBoard umbrella and hopefully we'll have our Lighthouse program underneath that and watch this space. We're working on another couple of initiatives as well.
Well, love your work. It's so cool. And thank you so much for coming and sharing it today, and can't wait to see where you take OnBoard next. And yeah, the benefits that then flow through to the boards and the ecosystem. Thank you for joining us. That's Cassie McAdams and Sophie McLernon. Tēnā kōrua.
Thanks, Simon.
So thank you to Sophie and Cassie, to you for listening, and for everyone who helps make this happen, like our producer, Samuel Robinson. Do follow Business is Boring wherever you get your podcasts, and rate and leave a review if you like what we do. E noho rā.
From the Spinoff Podcast Network, that was Business is Boring, brought to you by SparkLab. Make sure you're following Business is Boring wherever you get your podcasts. And for more information on SparkLab, visit sparklab.co.nz.